That is it for the second day of the January 6th Special Select Committee hearing. And it was another incredibly tight, remarkable day of testimony and new information. First of all, as the committee members file out, we heard at the end a number of people who were there on January 6th saying that if the election is stolen, what is it going to take? And the committee did a very effective job on this day, pointing out the number of Trump campaign officials who knew that the claims of fraud were bogus. The number of Department of Justice officials, from the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General, a U.S. Attorney in Atlanta, who went out and investigated these claims about, suitcases full of ballots and things that weren't proper. And every time they found that there was nothing there. They also had testimony from an election expert, Ben Ginsberg, widely respected Republican lawyer. A lot of people may remember him from the 2000 Bush v. Gore recount. Ben Ginsberg saying that the Trump evidence simply was not there, and pointing out, and this may be news to a lot of Trump supporters who will say, well, the reason these 62 courts rejected Donald Trump and his claims was because, well, they never heard the evidence. And Ginsburg pointed out, well, there were some cases that because of the procedural grounds or because the threshold wasn't meant to begin with, the courts rejected it. But he pointed out in half of those 62 cases, no, they did hear the evidence. They did hear the Trump argument, the argument through Rudy Giuliani, whatever evidence Giuliani was putting forward, and the courts repeatedly rejected it, finding that the arguments were scurrilous, that the evidence was nonsensical, that it was baseless. Some pretty interesting testimony from the U.S. Attorney in Atlanta, who went into, a lot of people who watched Fox News probably heard from Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, and others. This suitcase that suddenly appeared when the counting stopped in Atlanta, and suddenly it appeared, and that suggested, well, there must have been thousands of Trump votes that were suddenly Biden votes that were counted. And a federal prosecutor went in, looked at the entirety of the tape, as the Young Turks have done, and found that there's nothing here. There's a reasonable explanation. And what people think that they saw, what Rudy Giuliani called a smoking gun, was nothing like that at all. So a pretty effective job by the committee in keeping the testimony tight, having these witnesses, the U.S. Attorney in Atlanta or the Republican city council member in Philadelphia, who again also investigated what the claims were that were being brought that Donald Trump was suggesting, and found there was nothing there. And also some pretty compelling testimony about the power of Donald Trump's tweets, because the committee showed this one particular tweet from Donald Trump where he lambasted Al Schmidt as a rhino for essentially being corrupted by the Democratic mob, whatever the tweet was. And Schmidt talked about how suddenly the threats to him became very graphic and very violent, and the Trump mob, the fascists, then started putting pictures up of his family, of his house, his address, and the threats were very, very tough. So again, for people who are saying, well, Donald Trump, you shouldn't take his tweets literally. Well, the fact of the matter is, so many Americans did take Donald Trump's tweets literally and acted on it and were revved up and angered by President Trump, even though, and these tweets were coming out after Donald Trump had been told repeatedly by campaign officials, by the Department of Justice, by Trump's own White House staff, there is nothing to these allegations. These allegations are false. So in other words, the committee has this day, and for those of you who are just catching up, and you're going to see summaries of this on TYT throughout the day, and of course, wherever your choice of news is, although perhaps not Fox News. But the point of today was to show that time after time again, it wasn't the entire Trump campaign, Donald Trump, and so many countless Republicans who believed that there was election fraud. And you often hear from Republicans, oh, no, everybody knew it was fraud. No, the only people who thought that this was fraud were Donald Trump and Rudy Giuliani. Everybody else in the campaign, at the Department of Justice, the staff workers, the people whose job it was to monitor the election results and look at the precincts and see if there were any abnormalities, they knew. And they were telling some members of the media, there was nothing there. And they kept telling that to Donald Trump over and over and over again. And yet, the president kept tweeting about the big lie. He kept having the RNC send out these fundraising emails in which they raised more than $250 million, including $5 million that went to the organization that helped put on the January 6th rally that was part of the insurrection and the storming of the U.S. Capitol. There'll be more committee testimony coming up on Thursday, and that's when the committee will start to look back again towards the events that led up to January 6th. The point of today was simply to show that within hours of the election, of the November 2020 election, campaign officials knew that Donald Trump had lost. They knew that the margins were so big that even if there had been some fraud, there wasn't enough to make up the difference. And every one of these claims that was being made about fraud, about ballot systems not working, about Dominion, that was coming from Donald Trump out of whole cloth. There was nothing to support it. And this gets to the committee's overall goals to show that the responsibility of Donald Trump wasn't just to call off the mob on January 6th. He had a duty, he had an obligation to be honest with the American people, to accept the results, particularly when it was clear that the evidence supporting his claims of fraud were not there. And he was told by the highest levels of the US government, the highest levels of his own campaign, the evidence was not there. And he still yelled at his staff. He sent out crazy tweets. He did things that caused his own supporters to get even more riled up and angry and destabilize this country. And that's the impact that Donald Trump had, starting with the November election, moving up all the way through November and December and heading towards January the 6th. What a day.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.